Welcome to the Orton Gillingham Podcast, a Brainspring production. Today, we'll speak with Micki Ray, Chief Academic Officer of the Kentucky Department of Education, about how her experience as a high school English teacher inspired her passion to help struggling readers. Then, we'll hear about what the KDE is currently doing to improve literacy rates in Kentucky.
Hey, Kara.
Hi, Esther.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
Good. How long did it take you to drive to the office today?
Oh, and yeah.
We're having terrible weather here again.
Yes.
We always start with the weather, but it's so terrible and it's never going away. We're tired of Michigan right now. So,
agree.
The snow is bad. Anyway, we all made it here safe and sound, so that's good. Well, today we have a very special guest joining us. If you listen to our podcast regularly, you know that we love to spotlight individuals who are working tirelessly to help struggling readers. Today, our guest certainly fits that description. Her name is Micki Ray, and we're going to learn about Micki and her passion for literacy. Micki is the Chief Academic Officer of the Kentucky Department of Education. Previously, she served as Kentucky's literacy consultant for program standards, as a policy advisor for the Office of Teaching and Learning, and as a director of the Division of Program Standards. So prior to her her time at KDE, she was a high school English teacher. Yay, so was I, and an adjunct English instructor at Hocking College in Ohio. Welcome, Micki, fellow high school English teacher.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Thank you for coming. Is it snowing in Kentucky?
It is not today, but it has been snowing, and I will say it is equally as dreary apparently in Kentucky as it is in Michigan.
Yeah, what's happening? We all need summer to come for sure.
We do. I'm ready for it.
Well, thanks for coming on and agreeing to talk with us.
And Nikki, we are so excited to have you with us today. And we're really excited to hear about your work at the Kentucky Department of Education. But before we get started and get really into that, we really wanted to just hear about you and why you're so passionate about literacy.
As we all know, literacy is certainly key to academic success, but also lifelong success. And personally, I have always just loved to read. I come from a family of readers. My grandmother was a reader. My mother was always reading, but even my dad, he would be reading Bass Fisherman magazines and informational text all the time. So it was just my way of life. And I went to school already being able to decode. And so it's just what I knew. Mm-hmm. But my mom was an elementary school teacher. She taught at the same elementary school for the entirety of her career. And so she and I, as I got older, and certainly as I entered into the field of education, we would have discussions about reading, discussions about her students and how they were learning to read, how some of them were struggling. And so it was just a part of our discourse and just foundationally something that brought us together. Mm-hmm. But most significantly, as you mentioned, I was a high school English teacher for 15 years, and I have been at the KDE, it will be 7 years in March, but I still, to this day, every day, miss working with students. There is just an energy about being in the classroom, and I think my students would say everything was my favorite, like whatever it is we were reading at the time. Mm-hmm. And I tried very hard to keep up on like popular teen fiction to recommend books to my students. And what was concerning was that, more and more I saw that there were students that were not reading on grade level and who were really struggling to access the grade level text. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I was not equipped to be able to address some of those diverse needs. And it was deeply frustrating to me. And I saw the impact on my students. I saw how it impacted their confidence, how it impacted their general feelings about what we were reading and their desire to read in general. And so that has never left me because I want all of Kentucky students to be equipped and empowered to be readers, but also to be able to use those skills in career, in their college experience, and certainly beyond.
You know, Micki, what you just said, I think I've said 1,000 times myself. Really, just being in the classroom with teenagers and having a curriculum that they're supposed to follow and books they're supposed to read, and they just can't
Mhm.
always read them. And
Yeah.
and it's very frustrating as a teacher to know what to do. And at the time, I did not know what to do either. I was not an elementary educator. Nobody taught me how to teach somebody to actually read,
Hmm.
and I ended up reading every novel out loud to my students because that was the only way they were going to enjoy the literature, and get something out of it. But that you are preaching to the choir right now because I totally understand what you're talking about. It's very frustrating for teachers to not know how to help your students.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And so tell us how did that transition from teaching to the Department of Education come into being?
Sure. So we had a state law that was passed that required a new process for standards review and revision in our state. And previously, we had Common Core state standards adopted for ELA. And so I actually came to the agency to support and to help facilitate the standards review process for what became the Kentucky Academic Standards for Reading and Writing. And so I've always been what I would call like a standards girl. So I think there is real power and impact in the standards and knowing the grade level expectations for students. But
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I also was concerned about was how they can become sort of a compliance mechanism. Like, okay, we've done this one standard, we're through with that, and we're going to move on to others. And that was never really the nature of what our academic standards were supposed to be. So
Mm-hmm.
that really led me into work around high quality instructional resources. A lot of states refer to them as HQIM, so high quality instructional materials, but in Kentucky we do say HQIRs. And I think the interesting thing about that was the way that they bundle the standards in meaningful ways. And so it became more about the rich text that was
Mm-hmm.
utilized to engage students and to give them an entry point into the content, knowledge, and skills within the standards
Mm-hmm.
versus really putting the primary focus on let's drill on the skills connected to this one standard, which
Mm-hmm.
really doesn't meet the entire intent of that standard. I hope
Right.
that makes sense.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about uh, who you modeled this after? Like how did this come to be? The this new act. Maybe if you could talk about the act and then tell us how it came to be. Which
Sure,
yeah.
sure. So, originally, our standards review process law really put us in a position to analyze our academic standards. And so that led us to start thinking about the curriculum development process, our model curriculum framework. And so the Read to Succeed Act
Mm-hmm.
was passed in 2022. And that became sort of a way that I really believe kind of makes the experience full circle for the educator. So it
Mm-hmm.
allowed us to prioritize professional learning and make an investment in Kentucky teachers
Mm-hmm.
around how students learn to read, why they are struggling, all of those components that are connected to the science of reading.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a real sort of sea change that was needed in our state.
Mm-hmm.
So previously, we certainly had been supporting more whole language, balanced literacy approaches, and so this was the first time that it really equipped us to be able to support educators in
Mm-hmm.
structured literacy practices, foundational reading skills, and so
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of power there
Mm-hmm.
through the professional learning, and so we were able to also, though, support schools and districts in the purchase of, again, what we call high quality instructional resources. And so if they were wanting to invest in a high quality foundational skills program, like then they could do that, and we would be able to support not only the adoption of that resource, but the associated professional learning that teachers would need to be able to implement that effectively.
Mm-hmm. How did you choose the programs that you wanted to focus on?
So for the tier one resources, we relied on, clearinghouses such as Ed Report. So we're really asking district leaders to consider first the green rated resources from Ed Reports, and then start drilling down into their local needs and initiatives that they have ongoing. So, just as an example, if they are prioritizing project-based learning locally, well, that should be a part of the decision making that they have for their instructional resource.
Mm-hmm.
But we also were able to, for the first time, have an approved list of universal screeners,
Mm-hmm.
diagnostic assessments, and
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes people will say, well, we don't need more testing, but I think the significance of those two pieces is that without that knowledge, how can educators truly make database decisions
Right.
and make intentional both instruction and intervention moves to support students? And so
Mm-hmm.
that was really, again, something that the law allowed us to more explicitly state in a way that previously the department has not really been able to kind of support the field in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's great.
And I know with Kentucky, they started with the letters training, and then they moved into the science of reading realm. And did you, from the research that I've done, it looks like they modeled after Mississippi.
Yes. So the legislation is certainly modeled after the Mississippi legislation. In Kentucky, we don't have any kind of retention component, though. It's really about ensuring that students have additional supports beyond what they would receive every day in tier one, so that they are able to make accelerated progress towards proficiency. So that was a key part of it.
With this reading improvement plan, the framework looks pretty great. So I wondered, would you touch on kind of the framework of it?
Sure. So, after, of course, schools and districts are implementing the universal screener for those students who are deemed at being at risk. That's, of course, then when they would take the diagnostic. And based on the diagnostic assessment results, they would create a reading improvement plan. And the KDE has created a template for district use. People don't have to use that model, but it does have language where they could add in the data, but then also start to target the elements of the plan that will meet those individual student needs. And that is shared with their parents and families. And it's something, again, that allows for progress monitoring, so that we can have true understanding of what the student is learning, how they are progressing and growing, and if they can, end their improvement plan once they have reached that grade level of instruction. And so it is a new piece, and it is not light work, but we feel like without that reading improvement plan, the professional learning is so vastly important. And the coaching model, which we'll be implementing, is vastly important. And again, both of those things mirror what's happening in Mississippi. But without that reading improvement plan, we fear that folks won't really be empowered to make those intentional decisions. Historically, we've had a lot of one-size-fits-all sort of intervention models. We have relied on specific programs rather than really tailoring it to meet the needs of individual students.
I know in Mississippi, because we've done a lot of work in Mississippi with our program, Phonics First, and we've trained thousands of teachers there, and we started out there training the special ed teachers and interventionists. But we quickly discovered, and they discovered as well, gosh, why aren't we teaching our gen ed teachers this too? Because, you got to start it there. Start it in tier one and that might help some kids not even have to enter a special ed, program. Are you focusing
Exactly.
on? Did you start the focus with that tier 2, tier 3 intervention, or did you go straight to all instruction for all teachers?
So with Read to Succeed, we were targeting all K through 5 educators and
Okay.
administrators. We really wanted to focus on strengthening Tier 1. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
will say prior to the passage of Read to Succeed in 2022, there is a grant program that has been in place in Kentucky for a very long time. It's called the Read to Achieve grant.
Mm-hmm.
And that grant program historically targeted Tier 2 and Tier
Mm-hmm.
3 support. So I feel like prior to Read to Succeed, we were putting much of our energy into that intervention space.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone always says you cannot intervene your way out of Tier 1 core
Yeah.
instructional problems. And so that's
Right.
based on Kentucky's data that really had to be the focus of state level initiatives to
Mm-hmm.
try to support teachers in improving the quality of that Tier 1 experience for
Mm-hmm.
students.
Yeah, that was
So we
wise.
actually have K through 5 teachers. We have representatives from higher education who are partnering
Mm-hmm.
with us for the benefit of pre-service teachers.
Oh,
So we've really
great.
tried to be inclusive of many different roles, educational roles across our state.
That's great.
One of the things that I know you were super excited to talk about was the where the parents are involved in this whole process, which I thought was really exciting.
And we have done much work to try to support schools and districts and building out the resources for families. And so we do have um, a, a read at home plan for families that districts may elect to use. They can use their own thing, but we wanted to provide something for implementation, which this first year, so 23-24 is the first implementation year of Read to Succeed. And so we've got that read at home plan. We have it in English and Spanish, and I think 4 other of the most commonly spoken languages across our state, so that parents can have an entry point into this. And a lot of the educational jargon is defined in read at home plan, and it just gives them manageable learning experiences for home. So we didn't want to have to ask them to do too much. There's nothing to cut apart, there's nothing to glue.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Right.
literally just things that they can talk to their child about.
Mm-hmm.
But we also have another piece of guidance and it's a district facing document that really encourages, two-way communication, just best practices of communication with families across the Commonwealth as it relates to literacy, but also really any
Mm-hmm.
content specific piece that they would want to discuss with parents.
Mm-hmm. How do you see I'm excited to hear that you're also affecting the teacher education programs in colleges. How is that changing what they're doing now? I mean, are they teaching prospective teachers to focus on science of reading more, or how do you see that changing from your perspective?
Yeah. So one of my colleagues, Dr. Melissa Diebel, she's actually in our Office of Educator Licensure and Effectiveness. She's leading an early literacy working group that's connected to Read to Succeed specifically. And so they started their work by looking at the assessment, the praxis, and really thinking about,
Mm-hmm.
okay, is our assessment really measuring the things that we would want to be able to see of a practicing teacher in the
Mm-hmm.
field? And so there have been discussions around that, and there have been a few changes made. But the second part of their work was really looking at the curriculum and instruction within the foundational skills coursework, within the methods coursework,
Mm-hmm.
and even conversations around field placement and trying to
Mm.
identify teachers and districts who have seen the instructional shifts in place for literacy and
Mm-hmm.
have adopted a high quality instructional resource, again, so
Mm-hmm.
that we're giving those pre-service teachers the best experience that they can have. So I have
That's
been
great.
just really thankful for those university partners that Dr. Diebel has curated, and certainly we are learning much from them about, well, what needs do they have that we could
Mm-hmm.
try to mitigate so that they
Mm-hmm.
can better support those pre-service teachers in this space.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Mhm.
I'm an instructor also, and have worked with lots of teachers in teaching them, a phonics program, our phonics program, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, "Why didn't I ever learn this in college?"
Yes,
Why didn't
yes.
I ever?
Mhm.
They were kind of upset about it. I wasn't prepared. And so this is very encouraging to hear you say that. I mean, you're creating. It's not just a Band-Aid. I mean, you're going to parents, to universities, to school administration, to teachers. I mean, you're creating a real community here, and I think that's very encouraging. And you'll see results, absolutely, in your reading scores, I'm sure.
Well, we hope so. I mean, that's the thing. Like we know that Mississippi did not have a miracle. That took much work. It took hard work
Yes.
across all educational stakeholders. And so
Yes.
we really are trying to address systems change.
Mhm.
And to your point though, if that doesn't lead to increased student outcomes in literacy,
Mm.
then we will not have completed the mission that we have
That's
before
right.
us.
That's exactly right. That's it. That's super encouraging to 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 hear that it's being accepted, and you're having success. Because you know, flash back to maybe I don't know how many years ago, 20 years ago, this might not have even this wasn't on the radar at all. And so I think this is super encouraging.
Agree. And we
Yeah.
have been encouraged. And so thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and I'm just curious, what is the feedback with the teachers, Micki?
It has been overwhelmingly positive, just in terms of the letters professional learning. We have
Hmm.
been, I mean, just overjoyed and just thankful that so they're reporting that first and foremost that it is new information which
Hmm.
we've spoken to, but also the fact that it is immediately relevant and it supports the actions that they're taking in the classroom right now to meet the
Hmm.
needs of their students. So all of that has been very encouraging. We
Hmm.
did an internal survey last January just of the first cohort. So we've got over, well, approximately 4,000 educators who are going through letters at the moment. There's a cohort one that started, and they are now into volume two, but we have a second cohort of teachers who are now starting in volume one, which is all of that rich sort of foundational skills work. But we also worked with a third party evaluator, and so that has been extremely useful. So they have conducted surveys. There's going to be a series of surveys, and in the first survey they had over 800 Kentucky educators respond, which
Mm.
I thought was very powerful. I mean, they
Yes.
have much to say. They want to
Hmm.
be heard, which we appreciate. And
Hmm.
and so, I welcome questions. I welcome feedback. Like we want to know that this model is working for teachers and ultimately, we need it to work for
Hmm.
students. And so I think that we would not be doing our jobs if we weren't asking the questions, if we weren't seeking feedback. And thankfully, to this point, it has been very affirming that we are, in fact, moving in the right direction, one that benefits
Mhm.
teachers in our state.
Hmm.
And I know one of the things that was a concern for some of the teachers that maybe both of you and you and Esther could answer this is as teachers are working on the foundational skills, but the schools are measuring comprehension. How long does it take for those reports to show that growth?
Hmm.
Esther, do you want to speak to that first?
Well, I mean, it's very hard to measure comprehension, when you have kids who are struggling to decode.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, I imagine, what you have to do is get down to the core of it, and not rush it. But comprehension can be going on all along, as you're teaching these foundational skills too. And I think we have a better understanding how to do that now. It's teaching kids the decoding piece, but also, pulling in that comprehension piece. But it's not a quick fix. Like you were saying, it wasn't a miracle. What happened in Mississippi, that was a lot of hard work, and I think they're starting to see real results now because of it.
And how many years have we been with Mississippi?
I think we started there in 2017, maybe.
Yes.
Somewhere in that range. And so, it's been a long time, and they're very devoted, which sounds like you are too. And they're starting to see real improvement in the comprehension areas as well, for sure. So, is that what you meant, Kara?
Yeah, I know. Like you said, we've been with Mississippi, I believe it's been almost 8 years, or we're going into the 8th year. And I know with Kentucky modeling the same thing, how many years do you project to kind of get to where you want to be, Micki?
So I think we have been suggesting 3 to 5 years, and that's really more in line with implementation of that universal tier 1 resource. And just to add a little bit to the Kentucky context and what Esther said, like we are doing the same. We're recommending that districts adopt both a high quality foundational reading skills program that may need to be separate from their comprehensive reading program.
Right.
And so we're really pushing and highlighting the need for both of those pieces. So a knowledge building tier 1 curriculum, as well as an explicit systematic, cumulative, foundational skills approach as well. And so it's not an or for us. It is an and.
Right.
And I think, there does need to be time. Teachers need time to get to know those resources. And, that's one of the things that I really admire about Tennessee's approach to this, is that they were able not only to provide the professional learning, but they had an instructional resource, the foundational skills program that they were using, so it could become immediately actionable for teachers. And in Kentucky, our strategy was to start with letters, but now we're really trying to help folks deal with the dissonance that they may be feeling by having, now they have all of this knowledge, they understand how the brain works and how students learn to read, but for some, they don't have an aligned resource. And so that's kind of, it has to be both parts, in our opinion. And we are hopeful, we're hopeful we'll see an impact immediately, but realistically, we think 3 to 5 years, we should start seeing a more significant impact on student learning.
I think that's reasonable for sure. You can't have reading language, reading comprehension without both parts, right? Without we always think about that Scarborough's rope, right? With the literature, the literacy components at the top and the word decoding skills at the bottom. That all has to go together. So to get a complete reader. So that's awesome. It sounds like you're doing it the right way.
Thank
great.
you.
And is there, do you see this legislation changing over time, Micki?
I think that there could possibly be scenarios in which we do need to make refinements for the good of educators. But I do hope that it kind of sits in its space as it is, at least for a time, so that we can really know and determine the impact of different parts of the legislation. I think we need to be able to experience it as it is before I would encourage others to start thinking about ways that it may need to be tweaked. But I also know that that as we learn more and as we move forward, there might need to be adjustments that are made to the language of the bill.
What piece of advice would you give a literacy team who is not as far along as yours is? Do you have anything that you could tell them from your experience, what they could plan for and how they could get to where you're at?
One of the things that was the most surprising to me is that getting something like the legislation passed took numerous sessions. And so I guess I would just advise not to lose heart. Like if something deeply matters for teaching and learning, for teachers, for students, it is worth having conversations around. And, it is worth putting yourself out there to address questions for the good of moving forward. And so I think I would just say, take heart. It is hard work, but in time, and I think that now, more pervasively, we're seeing states sort of shift to the science of reading and numerous bills that are in place that are pushing on literacy efforts. And so hopefully some of the earlier work done by Mississippi and Louisiana and others will make it less difficult or less challenging to get some of the initiatives passed and moving forward.
Okay, so take heart. That's good.
Take heart.
It's
yes.
a good way to end.
Because it's worth it, right?
Absolutely, it's worth it. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise with us and with our listeners, because it's encouraging, absolutely. So thank you, Micki.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it, and thank you all for your questions and for our time together.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Great. So everybody, thanks for joining, and we are going to be, just so you know, starting a new series in the next little bit, discussing the pillars of reading and why each of those pillars is important. So stay tuned for that. Nice talking to you, Kara.
Nice talking to you, and thank you, Micki. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Orton Gillingham Podcast, a BrainSpring production. For additional content, please subscribe to our newsletter, visit our website at brainspring.com, or follow us on social media. To submit questions or comments, please email us at podcast@brainspring.com. Your feedback is always welcome.